Morning, and welcome to the second listening session on understanding the Black experience in Greater Kansas City. I'm Mark Garrett, Vice Chair of the Kansas City Chamber Board of Directors and Vice President and Chief HR Officer for Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Kansas City. Listening is the first step toward understanding, and we all need to understand that being born Black in this country brings with it a very different set of expectations from that of the majority. Today, you will hear some of those experiences from panelists from across the city. But before you hear from them, I'll share my experience. The recent events from Mr. Floyd's murder to the Central Park bird watcher being falsely accused of assaulting a white female, to the young man in Georgia being killed jogging while Black, awakened a reality that I probably never considered fully. As a successful Black executive, well-educated, committed to family, church, friends, and community, I believe any of these events could have happened to me in some form. It breaks my heart that in 2020, a blatant disregard for the law and the Black lives still exists in America today. That in 2020, I can still walk down a grocery store aisle and a white lady will grab her purse when she sees me coming. That individuals will lock their car doors when I'm walking to my car in a parking lot. It is my hope that we can use these discussions to both inform and change the way that we interact with one another in Kansas City. For Kansas City to achieve its full potential, it will require a willingness to accept the rich diversity that makes Kansas City a great place to live. But more importantly, it will require action. Action from corporations, government, social service organizations, individuals, places of worship, and other groups to ensure we build an inclusive and accepting city where social justice matters for all individuals. And while you'll hear from Black men and Black women today, make no mistake that my Latino and Asian brothers and sisters have similar stories to share. I believe we can and will do better as a community, state, and nation. I want to thank you now for your willingness to listen, and more importantly, for your willingness to take steps towards greater understanding. We will take your questions in the last part of today's session. So if you have a question, please submit it in the Q&A located in the toolbar at the bottom of your screen. It is now my pleasure to introduce the moderator for today's discussion. Nicole Jacobs Silvey is a president and founder of Connection Coach KC and a co-founder of the Roundtable. Without further ado, here's Nicole.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you to all of you who are able to join us in the second session in the discussion series. It's hard to believe it's been nearly a month since the murder of George Floyd at the hands of police that prompted the protests that we saw in Kansas City and across our nation. I'm glad that you're here today. 600 attendees strong shows the need and the desire for an ongoing dialogue and discussion. And while the protests may have quieted down, our work is just ramping up. When we think about what needs to be done in our community to make lives better for Black men and women across our community, our work is far from over. And this series is a part of that work. Just as Mark mentioned, listening is the foundation, the start of that work. Today, we will continue to listen to the stories of Black men and women from across our community, from different backgrounds, ages, and experiences. And what is shared here, what we will learn and what we will listen to will help inform the Chamber in their ongoing development of plans towards diversity and inclusion, and will help to increase the positive change in our region and ultimately beyond. Right now, I'd like to introduce you to our panelists and share their experiences with us today. First, we will have Jaree Brooks, who is a senior at Grandview High School.
Hello, everyone.
Welcome. Great to see you,
I'm
Jaree.
very thankful. Good to be here. My name is Jory Brooks. I'm an incoming senior at Grandview High School. I just wanted to quickly say that I'm very thankful for this opportunity to share, everything that I've been through and that I've seen, being Black in Kansas City. I don't want to take up so much of the time, introducing everyone, but I just wanted to say that I'm very thankful for this opportunity. Thank you, guys.
Glad to have you here, Jerry. And next we have Myron McCant, who is the co-owner, vice president, and CFO of the Kitty Depot Learning Academy and a member of the Prospect Business Association.
Can you hear me?
Yes, there you are, Myron.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much. I'm very honored to be a panelist today and look forward to participating. Again, I'm Myron McCant, co-owner of the KD Learning Academy, 24-hour child care center in Kansas City. Also sat on the board of the Prospect Business Association and also a board member of Reconciliation Services under the direction of the great Father Justin Matthews.
Welcome. And then next we have David Muhammad, who is the head youth instructor at Integrity Martial Arts Academy and is also the new martial arts enrichment instructor at the KC Girls Preparatory Academy.
Good morning.
Good morning. And next we have Councilwoman Melissa Robinson of the 3rd District of Kansas City, Missouri, as well as the Executive Director and CEO of the Black Healthcare Coalition.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for this critical conversation. As we listen, we learn, and we really give the energy and the foundation to make real policy change and true policy change. I know that this is going to be tough. It's going to be uncomfortable. But those of us who have been uncomfortable all of our lives, this is an important moment for us to embrace that uncomfortability and talk about how do we get to a point of reunification and reconciliation. So I am very much looking forward to the conversation today.
Thank you, well said. Next we have Tamika Thompson, who is a parent of a student in the Lee Summit School District and also works alongside Chancellor Beatty at MCC. Welcome, Tamika.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak to the group. I appreciate the attendees for taking the time to listen to this conversation, and I'm excited.
Well, welcome to all of you, and thank you for being a part of this conversation. As we know, I've talked to my Black colleagues and family members. Having these conversations can be tiring. Not only tiring, but we can be vulnerable. And in this space, you've chosen to join us to share your experiences, and that is very valuable and important to me. So thank you for that. As you are in the audience or listening in, before we begin the panel discussion, there's a few things I want you to think about. First, as people of color, we are not, specifically Black people, we are not a monolithic culture. So while we are sharing individual stories, they are just that, our individual stories, but I do want you to listen for the collective narrative that they speak to about white supremacy in our community. And as you listen, Melissa made reference to this, Councilwoman Robinson, that you will feel uncomfortable. What I ask for you to do today is to lean into the conversation and the shared stories that are here. I believe personal narratives have power. And in those stories, I ask you to not judge, but to listen with an understanding. And maybe there's things that you've heard before, but hopefully you'll have some aha moments. And what we ask for you is to consider your actions and how moving forward we can together be a part of the solution. So I thank you for that today. Again, remember the question and answer box, and we'll use that for the dialogue, but I'm gonna jump right into some questions. The first one is a term that we're very familiar with as Black people, and especially people of color beyond just the Black community, the term one of the only. It's when Black people may be the only person of color in the room, or one of the only? And it refers to this in a way that, or excuse me, what are your experiences with being one of the only in an environment? And how is it being a brown face navigating white spaces? So with that, I think I'll start with Tamika. Tamika, can you answer that question for us?
I have been one of the only many times in my life. I grew up in Kansas City area. When I was younger, we moved into the suburbs. At the time, we were in Raytown, where there were not a lot of Black people in Raytown at all. So I was one of the only students there. My experience there, I mean, was exactly, you know, how you would imagine. I remember, you know, just always being the person that was different, asking questions about my hair and culture. I remember teachers making the assumption that because I came from Kansas City that I was not prepared, or that I didn't, you know as much. I wasn't as intelligent as the other students, and having to, even at a pretty young age, understanding that I was going to have to prove myself in that space. And so that's something that's carried on through my life and into the workplace. And now in some cases, my kids are experiencing it. And so it's kind of sad in that respect, you know, playing outside and having people drive by and call you the N-word from their car, and you're a little, you know, you're a little girl, you're a little person. So you don't even know how to process that, but you know that it's harmful. So navigating those spaces, what do? You have no choice but to push forward and to push through. You can, it's mentally exhausting because you don't have anybody to relate to. You don't have anybody to vent to or share those conversations with. And so then it turns into, am I imagining this? Is this about my skin, or is this about something else? And so that unfortunately is something that, like I said, has continued on throughout my life, and now it's being passed on to my kids. And so, yeah, that's been my experience with being one of the only.
Thank you, Tamika. Myron, can I call on you? Do you want to add on to what Tamika shared and share your experiences?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
That mimics a lot of my life. I grew up in Excelsior Springs. I graduated in the class of 1980, and I was the only Black male in that graduating class. So during the 80s, during that 70s eras up through 80s, we don't have what we've been privy to have today in terms of a little more diversity. Back then, like I said, I was the only one, and then I graduated there to get into a commercial sales position in Kansas City under a company called Casey Envelope Company. It was an envelope manufacturer and printing. And what I found myself in the same place. Throughout the country, I was the only Black known salesman in that industry, and wasn't expected to survive in that industry. But I was there for 20 years and did well. And now I'm employed with a local tire dealership, sell tires to the national trucking fleet, and I find myself in that space again. And so this has kind of been a way of life for me. In all phases, though, you experienced what we're talking about today, and that was trying to navigate those circumstances and trying to become the best you could be in a minority situation. But that's been where that's been my stomping grounds for years.
Thank you so much. Jari, can I call on you to talk about how this affects the spaces that you're in?
Yes, I seriously do not mind. I'm not originally from Kansas City. I was born in Chicago, and I moved here roughly 10 or so years ago, and I lived in Independence for a couple of years. And in Independence, there were a lot of white kids around, and you know, I was one of the only Black people in the school. So coming in, I did feel uncomfortable being one of the only in the room. But I quickly was able to make friends with my white counterparts, because at that time I was around first or second grade. And to us as young kids, racism or things of that nature weren't really taught to us yet. We hadn't learned about Dr. Martin Luther King. We hadn't learned, you know, about the Black struggle or anything like that. So everything felt normal. I was not treated differently. I was, brought in and treated properly and fairly, you know. And then I moved out of Independence and moved to Grandview, where there are lots of Blacks and Latinos and everything. And I felt, you know, like I was around one of my own. And, so I've been living here in Grandview for about 7 or 8 years. And until around middle school and early high school, I started going to these leadership camps and stuff, around the country, where I would be one of the only Black people there. And I had a recent camp last year where I was one of 2 Black people in attendance, and I think there were a total of 60 people there. So that says around 57 white people. And I kind of felt uncomfortable, but me as a person, I kind of get around uncomfortability really quickly when it comes to people. So, I made my friends, I made my connections, I did what I had to do, what I'm saying, to integrate myself into the program. I took lead over some of the audio and video productions that we had, because I wanted to step forward, and there was a picture that we took at the very end of our program where it was me at the forefront, and then it had all of the white people behind me. And I thought that was a very cool picture because I was one of the only Black people in the front, and I just feel like, when it comes to being one of the only, I understand that it's very uncomfortable, especially to start. But as a youth, and, people really understand each other more compared to when it comes to adults and whatnot. I feel like it is more comfortable to be able to make relationships with our white counterparts. And I feel like I've been able to do that, through leadership camps, sports, school, etc. So, that's my experience with being one of the only.
Thank you so much, Dari, for sharing that. I'm going to pivot to another question, and this one I'm going to direct at David Muhammad. While we often understand what overt racism looks like, we know what racial slurs, hate crimes look like. Microaggressions are often more common, and the things that we experience more often, and they're nuanced. Can you share some examples of some microaggressions that you've experienced, and that phrase "death by 1,000 cuts" that often refers to what that experience can be like?
Yeah, and I think this is the perfect question after the question that you started with, because being in these spaces where you end up being one of the only, not only are we as Black people having to learn how to navigate those spaces, but then oftentimes whites for their first time are having experiences with people of color, and they themselves are struggling to figure out how to navigate that. And in the midst of that, they oftentimes, whether it be conscious or subconscious, fall back on stereotypes, right? And so my experiences with that were, it's always subtle things. It's someone white come up to you and speaking in a dialect that's very stereotypical hip hop. Hey, what's up, bro? Like that. And I'm like, well, do you even know if I speak like that? Right? It's someone touching your hair. Oh man, that's, like it's different, and even as a kid, it's like, man, why are you petting me? It's when I was in college, when I transitioned to Emporia State, the first question I got asked was, what sport did I play? And I was there on an academic scholarship, and so it's these little things, when I got my first teaching job, it was a kind of a indirect inference to, was I fulfilling a quota for the district? And so these little things, they nip at you. I love that term you used, death by 1,000 cuts, because they just constantly nip at you. And being one of the only, oftentimes we as Blacks, whether again we consciously or subconsciously do it, we often feel tokenized, and we sometimes feel a superiority complex of mind that, well, I'm here, I worked hard, and I kind of got to take it because I want to keep this good job, I want to keep this good opportunity. Or you start to feel a little special, like maybe they really let me in, maybe there's something about me And that's a dangerous place to be in. And I think that very young, we as Blacks who end up being in these spaces, we learn to code switch. You learn how to turn it on and turn it off. And you learn very, very young, very early, what not to respond to, what not to get angry at, because you don't want to jeopardize that position, that opportunity. And oftentimes we feel the weight of the entire race on our shoulders. So I know, okay, I'm here representing, I'm the first Black guy, or I'm one of the only ones. This is how they see Black people. This is how they're going to take it. And if I mess it up, I might mess it up for someone else. And so then you internalize a lot of things that others would not take. And so I hope that answered your question.
Thank you, so powerful. I saw lots of the panelists nodding their heads, and I wanted to give Councilwoman Robinson an opportunity to respond. I know she has a lot to say on this topic. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so very much. And I also appreciated the former question around being one and the only, and would like to say a little bit about that. Just oftentimes in African-American families, our parents teach us that you have to be twice as good to achieve half as much. And so oftentimes when you show up in these spaces, you're always reminded, especially when these microaggressions that are happening, is, you know, what am I doing? How am I performing? And also knowing that I might not, in many, many cases, that adage bears out true. So oftentimes thinking about, you know, how for me in my role and how I'm perceived by staff members and things of that nature of, you know, asking for information and not getting the same level of information that I see others receiving. The other thing is really leaning into a lot of the double standards that was previously stated, in saying that, okay, well, there's a certain amount of expectations that are there that are not present for others as well. But I think from a policy perspective, those microaggressions do come out a lot in policies. Just yesterday, we talked about, you know, tax incentive reform and how that impacts the education space in Black and Brown communities. That is something that folks oftentimes don't make those direct correlations and connections, or make those direct correlations and connections to, you know, the conditions of communities that we're in. And so it is something that we have to, you know, continue to be able to, not only for us to speak out on that, but when other people see those microaggressions happening, that they speak out as well.
Thank you, so true. All the comments are so powerful, and what's difficult with microaggressions, with there being nuance, people often say, oh, I didn't mean, that isn't what I thought. And what I call on the audience to consider is, if someone is sharing with you that it was offensive or that it hit them in such a way, to listen to them, trust the truth of what that person of color is saying, and intention is not the same as impact. So, and going on to the next question, a topic that I really like to speak about with people of color, specifically Black people, is that concept of belonging. So we know that it's that feeling of being welcomed, but not only welcomed as your authentic self. And it's a key part of an inclusive environment. Can you share examples of how you have felt like an other in an environment due to your race? And this may build on some of our earlier conversations, but what I want to hear is what schools, places of employment, and community spaces can do to create a more welcoming environment for people of color. And anyone who wants to chime into that is welcome to unmute yourself and answer.
I'll say, I think one of the biggest, most impactful things that organizations can do to make people of color feel welcome is look at their leadership structure. When you look at who is in charge and who is making decisions and who is making policy, and even at that level just below their executive leadership, it's telling. When you go look at a company to work for, or a school district to send your kids to, you look at who is the superintendent, who are the board members, what does the teaching staff, you know, look like, what's the makeup there, and sometimes that can be telling. And so it doesn't necessarily mean that you aren't welcome, but it does mean that there's only so much opportunity, or it looks that way. There's only so much opportunity for you here. And then that kind of translates into a culture of not being accepted and welcome, but tolerated. You're here and we have to have you here. So you have to kind of get on board with what we're doing, but you don't feel included. And so I think one big thing that organizations can do is start looking at why we live in Lee Summit, and I've held some folks accountable and asked the question, why are there so few Black teachers in Lee Summit? The answer I got was that no, they don't apply. And Lee Summit is one of the larger cities in the state. I don't know if that's true, if Black teachers are just applying around Lee Summit, but if that is true, then the school district has to ask why that is. Why do you think that Black teachers are not applying to Lee Summit schools? So it speaks to, are our children really welcome here? You're not welcoming leadership, you're not welcoming teachers, so how can we feel good about us being welcome here as families? And that goes into, various organizations, just using Lee Summit as an example.
Thank you, Tamika. Our school environments really live this out. And that made me think of David Muhammad, because I know he has taught in suburban schools. And I don't know if you had something you wanted to share, but I thought Tamika's comments really spoke to many of your experiences as well.
Yeah, very much so. It makes me, the first thing that comes to my mind, I don't know if you guys have seen the movie Get Out, but the scene at the lawn luncheon where you always feel like you're watched, in many of these cases. You're never all the way in. You're never fully all the way in. And I think this is where it's important to call out that simply hiring us does not fix the problem, right? Like just hiring a bunch of Black people and saying, well, look, like we hire Black people. That doesn't fix the issue. If you're not empowering their voices, then it's really superficial upliftment. You can even put someone in a position of assumed leadership, but if their voice is never listened to, and if their voice is never given the space to have actual impact, then what's the point of it? And I think that with that being said, the biggest thing that these organizations and these structures can do is listen. They have to start listening. They cannot just operate from a context of, well, we mean well and we want to do better. Right now there's this energy, and I don't know, this kind of goes away from the question, but I'm gonna say it, right? Like there's this energy right now where it's like, everybody's rushing to get out a statement. Everybody's rushing to try to show how down they are for the cause, because look, you better not miss this wave or you're gonna, mess things up. But is it sincere? And that sincerity is gonna come from not rushing to say the right thing, but slowing down to really hear what the communities you're servicing need and then act accordingly. And it might mean dismantling the way you run your structure, because an oppressive structure cannot fix an oppressive structure. You have to tear it down and build it up with new building blocks. You can't keep rebuilding it with the same oppressive blocks. It's just gonna look different. And it might look prettier and it might have a Black face on it, but it's still oppressive. So with that being said, yes. And I think that listening is the big key, and empowering the voices that you actually do bring in.
Oh, thank you, David. I see so many comments posting up in the chat, and then remember the question and answer section. People can post things that we'll refer to later. Thank you for your comments. I've been talking to people about, is it PR, and are we taking PR to practice? So these statements that have been sent out, it's going to be proof when systemic change occurs based on operationalizing these suggestions and the change that we want to be anti-racist. Thank you so much. Anybody else want to add on to that, Councilwoman?
Yes, and I want to say that, many of these statements, I would say 99.9% of them don't take an internal reflection of the oppressive policies and practices within the organizations that these statements are coming from. And they know that they're there. They know that these practices exist. They've heard them. We've said them, and they continue oftentimes to respond to, we're listening, and that is important, but what are you doing to act? What are or how are you calling out those policies that you've heard decades after decades, years after years of people saying that we want change? Recognize that those items and then come up with a solution. That's what I would like to see with the policies that are coming out, to say, look, we have been oppressive in these ways, X, Y, and Z. You have enough EEO complaints to lay it out. And this is what we're going to do to respond, to improve, to be better. Because again, oftentimes the statements that are out there, there's not enough reflection. We have to think about, what is it going to take for reconciliation? We have to reflect. We have to make sure that we are stretching ourselves. We have to be very. I'm trying to think about all of the acronyms for reconciliation, but we have to make sure that, again, that they really mean something and they're reflective of what's actually happening in the organization.
And can I just add one more thing? I think that starts to make it real make it actionable for the participants. It starts with including these things in your strategic planning. If you are saying that we recognize it, we're with you, Black Lives Matter, yay, a lot of times that does come off as PR because your competition has said it, so now you have to say it. But if you start really putting that work into your strategic plans and your organizational goals, then that starts to operationalize your statement and your intention. And so I think I agree with David and Councilwoman Robinson that it feels good. It feels good to say it, and it feels good, and it feels like a moment. But if we don't see those things reflected in your action, I know, I'll use an example. There's a company called Glossier. It's a national makeup brand. And, they put out a similar statement, but then they said, hold us accountable. In our next annual report, we're going to talk about the ways that we fix these things. We're going to offer, some grants to Black women-owned businesses that do what we do, but we know that they face barriers. So there were really some actionable things behind their statement that then people can go back and say, hey, wait a minute, you said last year you're going to you're going to show us how you've improved in your next annual report. And I think that was a perfect example of just, you don't have to have the answers right now, but let us know that you're going to make the change, and then hold yourselves accountable.
Thank you. You gave some clear steps. All of you have. This is powerful, and I'm looking forward to seeing where this goes next. When I think about the comments that you've made, so much of it is people say, oh, we're having this conversation again. And I dare say it's because we haven't had the conversation at this level. And so when it sounds like people of color are getting animated with our voices, it's because we're saying it louder, hoping that this time it won't fall on deaf ears. So thank you for that. I'm going to move to another question and go to Jari on this one. What can we do to keep talent like you in our city? I see your shirt and it is perfect. I am Black excellence, and you're every bit that. Thank you. Let everyone see. And we want to keep you here, and we want Kansas City to be that destination. What do we need to do to keep you here?
As a student in Kansas City, we really see as Black people that opportunities are so scarce for us. Like, we fear that when it comes down to making a college decision or a career decision, that there will not be opportunities for us in the city. So that sends people like myself and, other people that I know out of the city, out of the state, if that, because they fear that they won't be given the same opportunities as white counterparts or, people of higher stature, people that are wealthy or anything like that, So I feel like us moving forward, like, everyone should have a fair and equal shot to succeed in the city. And I feel like if that has anything to do with, racial inequality, like, if businesses or corporations do not feel like that Black people should be admitted or treated fairly in their corporations, then I feel like, as one of the other ladies said previously, that, there will need to be some, actually what David said, there will need to be some reform. Like, they will need to go back, and they will need to, destroy what they have created and recreate something new. And that keeps people like myself in the city, you know, knowing that we are given opportunities here, you know, and that everything will be fair for us, you know, that will persuade pretty much any Black person to stay in their city. But if that's not here, then we're gonna look elsewhere. That's all.
Thank you, Jerry. Myron, can you add on to that? I know you've had a long career and great success. Can you share some of your experiences, and what do you think companies and our community can do now to retain our Black talent?
You know, I'm listening to the opportunities of reform. I'm listening to the dynamics that come from that, and all of the policies and things that could happen to make it better. But, you know, I was having a conversation last night, and one of the things that I spoke of is we can come up with all of these matrix, but I think what has to happen is we have to be at the table. We have to be a part of that policy and that decision making. I think we have to be inclusive at that level to really make a change or have a chance of reform. How can you make a policy or develop matrix for what's going to help my life if I'm not there to tell you how it's going to best impact my life and the outcomes? So until we can develop all the matrix, we can develop all of the reform, the opportunities that we want to, but until we are at the decision-making level, until we are at those boardrooms, until we are at the decision-making table, it's all for nothing.
And can I add that one of the common conversation, and I think everybody on this panel that has worked for any period of time will be able to tell you this experience, and this is just an actionable thing in terms of keeping talent. How many times have you been in a role where you've worked and you knew you weren't going to get, you wouldn't have even got your foot in the door without at least one degree and however much experience and how many certifications, and then you look across the aisle and your white counterpart doesn't have that experience, doesn't have that, or even you're the person above you doesn't have that, and you wonder, how did you do that? I have a friend, I'll use an example. I have a friend who works in for a medical journal, and she had to have 2 degrees or, you know, a master's degree, X amount of years experience to even get the position. And then comes in and finds out that one of her coworkers, same level, same job, had come from being a retail store manager and did not have that experience. And it happens a lot. And so it's not my quote, but I read somewhere that, you know, value our experience and our education as much as you value white people's potential. So if you can't look at us and say, oh, you can look at somebody and say they have potential. They may not have the experience, but there's something about them. I believe in them. I think they can do the job. Whereas if the Black people coming in the door, if we're, you know, 2 years shy of your experience requirement, we don't have a shot. And we know that coming in the door. We know that. We know what we're up against. And I mean, in addition to things like our name and I mean, just our first names, you know, can eliminate us from opportunities. And so when you go in and you're thinking about that, when you look at your organizational structure, think about how many of these people have equivalent experience in education. Why did we hire this person based on their potential, but this person didn't get the shot and they have everything that we're looking for? I know for a fact, you know, with my own credentials and experience, I know I could get a better job. I know I could get a higher level job, I should say, somewhere else in another state. You know, I choose to stay here. And so I hope that those that are listening, that are in charge and that are making decisions would really take a hard look at that, because I think it's a major problem, and it's a problem that a lot of Black people experience and can relate to.
Nicole, I just have to, I know that this takes us off a little bit of beaten path, but I just want to be true to what I said earlier about calling out microaggressions. And there was one on this call already, in that talking about animation and people being animated. Oftentimes I'm referred to as the angry Black woman. And so that is a microaggression. And we have to, when we talk about creating spaces of welcoming spaces for everyone, we have to make sure we allow people to be their authentic selves. And so I just wanted to connect the dots there, and say that that's important to think about how those things play out in these conversations.
I'm so glad you added that, Councilwoman Robinson. Tone policing is another issue that we see, that we talk about quite a bit. And we won't have time to get into it today, but I'm glad you named it so people can continue to look into that. We were talking about spaces, and Tamika, you spoke some truths. I saw the chat just lighting up too, again, with your comments. And I wanted to share something. Most of my opportunities that I have received, even potentially this one here, came from white individuals of influence and prestige who put my name forward. And I've always been grateful, I continue to be, and hopefully humble. But what has always been unsettling to me is the system that makes it that the white people are the gatekeepers. It often isn't a person of color who puts my name forward, or it isn't just that my resume stood on its own or the opportunity. It was that someone had to co-sign for me. And I'm thankful and grateful to all the many people who have done that. And they are deep in my network, but therein lies a problem, because if you do not have individuals like those that I have that is sponsored and been champions for me, the same opportunities don't come your way. So I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that. Another question, because we're getting almost down to the Q&A, and this is such a good dialogue. I'm learning so much. It goes back to representation. We talk about representation matters, and it's more than a hashtag. When looking at the list of recipients of local awards and leadership programs and board position, there continues to be a lack of diversity. And this is a conversation that's been going on and on. And Black people are consistently underrepresented, as we know, as well as other people of color. Why has this occurred, and what can leaders do to be more inclusive and honor the contributions of people of color, specifically Black people?
In my capacity, I get all of those lists, the 40 under 40 and the women to watch and the 30 under 30. And there are some of those awards that go out where I think those selections are made with more care than others. But when I look at those things, especially certain publications will send them out, and every time I'm like, this is a shame, this is an embarrassment, because there won't be possibly maybe one Black or brown face in a group of 40 people. And you kind of, I don't know that anybody here is enough of a gatekeeper to answer the question of why that is. I think that's a question for the people that are doing the naming and the people that are doing the submitting, but it's definitely problematic, and I think embarrassing for our city when you look at some of the awards that go out. I mean, even my family is business owners, and we have seen awards for, barbecue restaurant, best barbecue restaurant. The top ones, I mean, other than, Gates, are not even Black owned. And I mean, and that's so much of Black culture in Kansas City. So we are not, and I don't mean to push back on the question, but we don't have, that's a question for the people that have the keys to the gate. Why is that? Why aren't we recognized as much? Why aren't our names put forth in those conversations?
No, that isn't pushed back. Therein lies the answer. We're not a part of the selection committee is part of that answer. Does anybody else want to chime into that, Councilwoman Robinson?
I just would also say that oftentimes with those lists, it's about who's in your circle. So you have to intentionally, instead of, I've been asked a lot, like, send us your names. Do you have people of color? Do you have people that you would want to, elevate? And we have a responsibility to do that as people of color, to make sure that we're reaching back and shining the light for all of the other Black magic that's around us. But for the people that are on those selection committees, they also have to take on ownership to really diversify their circles of their friendships, the people that they're in relationships with, and be intentional about developing those relationships so that you can expand your own connection to individuals that are doing so much of the great work. And oftentimes when you see the list and you see pictures, I'm always asking, and even, being the chair of the school board for Kansas City Public Schools for the first couple of years, I would ask myself, where are the Black people? Where are the Black people? So when you're putting out these pictures and you're putting out these lists, think to yourself, where are the Black people? Where are the brown people? Because it needs to represent the same amount of percentage. If we're 30% African American, then these lists need to be 30% African American as the floor. And we can grow from there, but we have to begin to stretch ourselves and deepen our relationships with individuals.
Yeah, and I'd like to jump in as well. I mean, well, I agree with Tamika, like we don't necessarily have all the answers, but one thing that I think we all recognize is that these structures have always colonized our talents, right? And if you look at the way in which, it's not that there's not talent out there, right? That's a known. As a matter of fact, much of the success of some of these people you see on these lists is because they reap the benefits of using the talents of people of color around them and then packaging it differently and carrying it as their own, oftentimes without paying them anything extra. I mean, I'm sure that on this panel alone, many of us have been asked to give our insight on equity matters and diversity and inclusion and not get an extra dime. And all we gave was time and a pat on the back for, doing a good job and helping the cause. And then someone else reaps the benefits of that. And that's really the history of this country. If we want to look at it, we ain't got that kind of time. I mean, today I got time, but I ain't gonna do that to you. But it always makes me really kind of wonder, even from just a political correctness, right? Like good business, it would make so much more sense if these organizations at least faked it, right? Like the school district I worked in, they were always complaining about, why aren't we getting more diverse hires? But then their videos that they would release about the district didn't show anybody of color. And they say, well, we don't have anybody in administration of color. Okay, get all the Black teachers you have and fake it, right? Like at least show we're trying, and I think that's what politicians do, right? Politicians will go around and make it look like they really care about the issue. And then they get in and then they don't, right? But at least, start looking at it from the vantage point of, if this is what you feel like you need to do to make people, see that you care about the issue, then put out what you do have, right? And I think that, it's nothing new. And sometimes it makes you get a bit jaded because it's like, well, I don't want your award if it's not going to lead to anything different. Because sometimes they give you the awards just to pacify you, right? All right, we'll give them this award, finally, and it doesn't even feel genuine, right? Like I remember when Denzel finally got the award for Training Day. I'm like, bro, he did Malcolm X and everything else. Like, you're gonna give him the movie for that? Halle Berry got the movie finally. Okay, I can digress, but you guys see what I'm saying? Like, oftentimes it's like, well, we got to shut him up now because everybody's complaining about we're not fulfilling the race quota. So then they give it to you almost posthumously, right? Like after you've done all this great work. And so I don't want that either. Give me my roses while I can smell them, and make sure that they lead to actual new plants being grown and not roses that's gonna die. So.
So good. Thank you, David. Wow. We're coming to the end of our time for the panel discussion. So what I wanted to do is give each of you an opportunity to give some final thoughts. I know we went through the questions quickly, and I think we only got through half the questions. So if there's things you want to build on, final thoughts that you would want our listeners to take away so that they can take what they've heard and start building the action plan. So in their places of employment, they can operationalize the things that we're speaking about. So I'm going to start in order with Jari, sorry.
Oh man, I'm going to be honest, going through all these questions, my blood's been boiling because I've been itching to say something, but then, I understand, other people have thoughts too, but I really feel like it's important for me to speak on the question that was about belonging, and we were talking about employment. Especially for my mom's sake, because she's been working at a company for 10 years and she's seen countless new white people come in and get managerial roles and supervisor roles. And she would always tell me about how she felt like she knew everything in that company in and out, but she was never given the time of day to be a manager or somebody of a higher stature. And, when that question was brought about, I was like, man, I have to say this because, my mom isn't here right now and I feel like she would really want me to talk about that. And, then there was another question where, we were talking about reforming boards and stuff, positions where, where Black people should be in, to help, the white people make decisions and whatnot. I just wanted to add that I am in a Black coalition group right now as we speak, and we are working with Black communities and Black youth and everything. And I feel like, my group could help so many boards, make decisions and whatnot, because we're trying to make a change as young Black people. We really are. And there was an idea brought forth my way last night, that my group could actually help the KC Chamber form a youth session. So people like me could talk like everyone else in this group has been able to talk, so I'm sorry. There's so much going through right now because there's so much that I missed and I really wanted to say, but I really do feel like that if that is able to happen, please consider having my Black coalition group help orchestrate all that. So people like me aren't sitting here with their bloods boiling and having the adults talking, knowing that we really want to say something. Let us have the floor and say what we want to say, because I'm sure there are so many youth out there that have so many stories and so much input that we feel like if we were to throw out there to you guys would be able to see what we're going through as young people and help make changes, not just for you guys, but for us too, because we go through things that you guys might go through similarly or differently. So let me catch my breath. But yeah, I feel like those 2 points right there, I just needed to say before we move on to the next thing. Thank you guys.
Wow, absolutely, Jari. And we can circle back to you if you think of some additional comments you want to say. But what I'm seeing in the chat is everyone wants your contact information. I saw Jari's going to change the world. You're our future. And I hope you get to see the rest of the comments in the chat because we believe in you and we're listening. We are listening. So I'm going to let the other panelists answer this final question, but you let me know if you want me to come back to you to share some more because you have the floor. Okay. Thank you. Let's go on to Myron.
Hey, I just want to thank everyone that took a part in this today. I see this opportunity as the greatest opportunity I've seen in my lifetime for reform. And to my white brothers and sisters, to my white colleagues and cohorts, I want to thank you for joining in with us in this effort. Every sign of progress or every measure of progress we've ever made in terms of racial inequality has been generally at the cost of someone's life. And this time I've seen you join in with us in a way that I have never seen before. And I've always said for years, we've been protesting, we've been rioting, we've been looting, and we've been shouting to the rooftops. But I've always often said that nothing will change until the powers that be unite with us and stand with us and understand what it's going to take to move forward. And what that consequently means is you have to become a part of our world. There are two worlds that exist here today. And there's a black world and there's a white world. And as a man of color, we have to operate in both worlds. And so what they don't do is they don't operate in our world. So for us to truly have an opportunity to reform, I welcome you into my world. I'm doing a development right now on 22nd and Prospect, and this development is to enhance the life of children. There are so many things that we need. There's so much advice, an advisory board. We need people like yourselves that are at the decision-making level that can help promote our business and that can help move our business to the next level so that as our neighborhood transforms economically, you would feel comfortable and you would feel welcome in becoming a part of that organization, or you would feel welcome to leave your children there at a Black-owned establishment. So all of these things are possible. All of the things that we have come up with today, they're wonderful. It's the incubation stage, but what I will be looking for is the baby in maturity. And I will be looking to see what happens as a result of all of the things that we have accumulated today. So I just want to thank everybody that attended, and I particularly want to thank my white colleagues. I will look forward to working with you, and this is truly what's going to make the difference and make us all a part to be one. Thank you.
Thank you, Myron. I'm so glad you could be here today. Tamika, you want to go ahead?
I echo what Myron said. I appreciate people, some of the names that I see in here. I know your schedules, and I know you're busy people, and I appreciate you taking the time out to listen. And I would just close with, when you're going back to your teams and you're talking about what you can do to advance diversity and inclusion in this city and in your organizations, that you would think of Jari and his enthusiasm and keep him in mind, because, I'm not that old, but I'm old and jaded. He still has that optimism and enthusiasm and hope. And I just hope that you will keep him in the back of your mind when you're thinking about how you restructure and reframe your organizations and what you do. And that's all I have to say. Thank you for the opportunity again.
Thank you so much, Tamika. We'll go ahead and we'll hear from David Muhammad if you want to do some final thoughts, and then we'll kick it over to Councilwoman Robinson.
Yeah, first I want to say thank you, Nicole, for these really intentional questions. I've sat on many panels where it was smoke and mirrors, and this was really great. So appreciate you for the intentionality here. But I think what I'll leave everybody with is, don't get exhausted. It's very convenient right now to be engaged in this struggle because, the world was shut down and this was right in our face. And as we, hopefully start heading back to some senses of normalcy, there'll be distractions that can easily pull us away from this, and recognize that there are people who are engaged in this before all of what happened with George Floyd, and there will be people who will remain engaged ongoing. And that's where your true intentions will show. If you only got engaged now because it was the moment and you felt like you needed to because funders, that's what they needed to see or whatever that might be, then it's not really sincere. It's not genuine. This is a long haul. There will be more pain. And when you see that happen, don't respond with, well, I thought, well, we did something a year ago. That's great. You know what? But like, people work out every day. I can't, stop working out just because I worked out yesterday. And so this is a long haul. This is a marathon. And I feel like, you have to prepare for mistakes. You have to prepare for more struggle, and recognize that everything that we do is setting forth the ground for the future. So.
Thank you so much. There's so many beautiful comments, but one that just resonated was, David, we need more teachers like you for our kids. Mm-hmm. Amen. Councilwoman Robinson?
Thank you also again. I was one of those people that said, can you guys just go watch the Hulu and Netflix list of what Black voices, what we've been through? Do we have to, do this yet again? But certainly am very appreciative of an opportunity to, hear these voices and to start not only a conversation, but a movement with the chamber and others to make the difference that we need. I did want to introduce this model regarding reconciliation because it is so critical that we get to reconciliation, and that requires us to deeply reflect on the wrong that's been done, and this is what this is about, is that reflection. But we also have to be very innovative in the way that we dismantle the oppressive structures that exist, and so it's going to require organizations like the chamber that has access to innovation and censoring the voices of the individuals that are most impacted. Censoring the voices around Jari. We knew that he was going to be the most impactful voice on this panel, but making sure that that's critical. And also stretching. We know that this is going to be hard. It's already been said on this call that we have to be in this for the long haul. and we have to elevate the voices of others. And so that's the RISE reconciliation model that people use all around the world. And I think we should dig deeper into what that looks like in terms of a reconciliation for the city, so that we can ensure that we're demonstrating, and just again, sharing my story as a Black woman. I've been taught to collect receipts, to show, to have proof. And so that's what we're asking. We have to demonstrate. We need those receipts. We need that proof that we're going to see change.
Thank you. So powerful. Jari, I said I would throw it back to you in case you had any other final comments, because we always want to hear from you, and then we're going right into the question and answer.
Okay, well, I just wanted to make note of my Black Coalition group, because I saw a couple questions in the chat asking what was the name and whatnot. My coalition group is called BACON, Black Archives. Oh my goodness, sorry. It's called BACON, Black Archives Youth Coalition of Networking. And we're run through the Black Archives, which is an organization that is in the city, in Kansas City. And if anyone would like to work with me or my group or the Black Archives as an organization to help, orchestrate a youth session or several youth sessions, I would love to talk. That's all I want to say. Oh, and then thank you all for this opportunity. I'm very appreciative, and this was very fun. Listening to everyone talk, like I said earlier, has really gotten my blood boiling. It's just very powerful to hear grown people's minds and what they believe and stand for when it comes to racism and everything like that. I'm sorry, my mom is entering the house behind me, but anyways, yes, I really do appreciate this opportunity, and I'm glad to have been a part of this. Thank you all.
Thank you. So well said. And we'll see if we can send out that contact information to your organization to those who are listening as well. So thank you for that. I'm going to be reading some questions that have come through. So bear with me as I read these, because there's been so many, and we've had people behind the scenes that are filtering through these. The first one is, sorry, hold on a moment. Get back there. Here we go. We have so many. I have always worked for white men, male-driven senior leadership. I'm a big proponent on changing this, but like Tamika mentioned, we don't get these positions open often for women of color or men of color. How can we do better at recruiting, educating, training, et cetera, to build leadership opportunities? And I'll let you just chime in, unmute yourselves, and answer if you feel the question is one that you want to take on.
I don't know that there is anything that we can do other than developing relationships and, putting ourselves in position to be afforded that opportunity. What I would tell you even more importantly, I think, is particularly in our community, we need to be entrepreneurs. We need to start creating our own space, and we need to start creating our own businesses, so then we don't have to depend on someone else to give us that opportunity that we have never got. It's a tough situation. It's a tough space that we live in, but entrepreneurialism, I think, is the key.
The other thing that we might consider also for those who are in corporate America, and it's a lot around how do you build coalitions. There was a question in the chat box around, how do we get access to the names of people of color that are doing great things. There is an association for every industry that are centered around Black people and ran by Black people and with Black people. So how do we build those coalitions to start to elevate those individuals up the ranks in many industries? And then the other thing that was stated earlier is not just, we also have to take responsibility, and through the empowerment and the authority that we're given by the organization, obviously, but it's not just enough to say, we have all these Black people in positions of power. We have to make sure that that's translated into real policy change. And who are those individuals that are not only being mentors, but how are they sponsoring other people throughout the ranks and being champions of individuals that are within those cultures. There's a lot of DI professionals that are out there But if those DROs don't connect to real policy change, then it's a waste of resources.
Yeah, and I'd like to chime in. I really appreciate what Myra and Councilwoman said. You know, when that question was read, the first thing that came to my mind is like, is that what y'all really want? You know, like these organizations and these companies, do they really want Black people in power and control? And like to sit around and wait for that opportunity to me is sometimes unrealistic, because I think there's a fear. I know there's a fear of Blacks being in control. Maybe there's this mindset that we're going to try to like seek some kind of revenge once we get in power or some sort. And so I think we do have to work to build up our own opportunities. But along with that, the difficulty is that we don't own any land, like, you know, and we don't own a lot of structures to do anything beyond maybe an individual corporation. And, you know, there's a few one-off, you know, examples and things of that nature, but oftentimes to ascend up to that point, the power structures that are over that, you know, you start getting into government are don't look like us and don't have our interests in mind. So it is a behemoth. And sometimes I think, I don't know, that's a tough one, you know, like it sounds good to say, well, how can we get more Black people in control and more power? Then I say, that's the whole thing. They don't want that, you know, and they're not going to give that up. Why would they give up their power just because it's, you know, the right thing to do? Like, if that was the case, we wouldn't be in this conversation. So, yeah.
Yeah, and we know that power is never given, it's always taken. And power concedes nothing without a demand. So what are our demands, and how do we get to where it is that we want to go? And that's
so powerful. I have another question. This is for all of you. Why is it, in your opinion, that we have this only issue? I believe this is in reference to the first panelist question about being a Black face in a white space.
I think that's another question that we don't have, that is not for us to answer. Why are we the only people? I mean, in some cases, it's somebody's got to go first. I mean, it's 2020. We're still having first Black recognition, you know, so somebody has to go first. But, you know, that's an excellent question. Why are there spaces and places that we are there's only one Black face? I maybe somebody else on this panel can answer, but I don't have the authority or the power to put more Black people in spaces and places. And even sometimes when you do have the power, there's still politics in place that, hey, I can't fill my executive leadership team with a whole bunch of Black people, even though I'm Black, because then they're going to say that. So you're always thinking about that, even when you're in power. So that's a good question, but I don't know if it's for us to answer why we're the only.
I'll call out the fact that, I'm sorry, Councilwoman, you go ahead.
Oh, you go ahead, brother. Well, structural racism and oppression, I mean, we have to begin to call out what are those structures, overt, covert racism, and how do we dismantle them? They're there, but if we're not going to be intentional about dismantling them, and it's also around economic power and saying that, you know what, if this company is not going to respect and reflect the values and elevate people in a way that's not oppressive, then we're going to take our resources someplace else. So I think that there's different strategies, but I do agree with Ms. Thompson in that, you know, white people, y'all have some work to do. Y'all have to figure some things out. And we can't always be the ones to repair what's been broken that we didn't break.
Yeah, and I want to jump in and say, you know, and this is just we keeping it real, you know, keep it 100. Sometimes the Black people who get hired in certain positions can reinforce the same oppressive structures that have been working against us for years. And I think all of us as people of color have to watch out for this, because you get in and then sometimes you can develop the like being that only mindset and work against your own and not want others to get in because you're afraid they may highlight something in you that you don't want to be heard, or make things uncomfortable and ruffle feathers, like, oh man, don't mess up this good opportunity, you know, so we can't let too many in, and they'll work to keep others out as well. And so I think that, you know, we have to recognize as Black people to make sure that we ourselves are not falling victim to the structures and systems that we've been fed our whole lives. We have a lot of unlearning to do ourselves. And I throw that also, you know, just a side note, I know a lot of whites right now are asking questions and wanting their Black friends to, you know, help them in this process, which is great if you're sincere, but recognize that we too are doing a lot of learning too. It is not over. This journey for us, we've got a lot in us that's been programmed that, you know, has stereotypes against our own people. And so we don't have all the answers. And as Nicole mentioned, we're not a monolith, and it's a journey for us. So just like we got to go through this journey, y'all got to go through it too.
David Muhammad. Oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I would mimic what, to a great degree, what David said and what Councilman Robinson said. But I think this is a comprehensive effort. I think we have to do this together. I don't think the whites can do it by themselves. I don't think the Blacks can do it by themselves, but I think we have to purpose to work together. And we have to understand the sensitivities that have been created, and we have to work together toward a common goal. I want to say to David, no, we don't, to the point that you made a while ago, no, we don't own a lot of land. No, we don't. But I am an example, and I purposed to be an example, particularly to some of the young people in the opportunities that I've been able to develop in terms of being a business owner, the opportunities that was given for me in terms of developing my own ground. I want to tell you that it was not easy. I mean, there were many days that I wanted to throw in the towel. There were many days my naysayers were starting to convince and go against what I felt like God had purposed me to do. But I want to tell you that it can be done, and I am hopeful what we've been able to achieve, or what we're trying to achieve, would be inspirational for you young people, and not only you young people, anyone else that has a desire to become a business owner, to develop something that you actually own. In acquiring that and trying to get there, I had to answer also to the powers that be. And yes, there was 3 times required of me what would have been required of my counterpart, but I continued, and I was just determined that this was going to happen if it killed me. I have to shout out to Councilman Robinson right now. She was my point guard. I mean, she was very instrumental in helping us with this. So you've got to posture yourself. You've got to get yourself in the right position. You've got to develop those relationships. But I will tell you that all things are possible. And I hope that my example and what we've been able to do so far, you'll be able to see the results of it here in just a very few days. But I hope that it would be inspirational to you and anyone else that has a goal out there. It is possible, but you're going to have to put in the work, and don't give up.
Yeah, and I appreciate you saying that, brother. You know, I really do, because I feel like, you know, there's a lot of unlearned history that we don't get taught, right? You know, we don't get taught about the Nation of Islam building their own businesses in the 60s and 70s. We don't get taught about Tulsa, you know. We don't get taught about Philadelphia. And even though these places were destroyed and bombed, that perseverance is very true to hear. So we have to hear both sides of it, you know, the fact that, like, there are Black millionaires, there have been Black millionaires in the past, and we have to learn that history is really important, I think, also, so that we recognize that when we do that, they will come. They will come and fight against it. And if we're not prepared for that struggle, then we'll be fooling ourselves. So I appreciate that, brother.
And really quick, what David just said, informing people of, you know, all those instances and stuff, where do you think that starts? I mean, that starts with youth. If you guys could teach us, you know, before we reach an age of maturity to where our minds are set and fixed on an idea or, you know, a belief, you guys teach us, you know, both sides, see both sides. I'm sure there will I would love for it to be my generation, but there will be a youth generation that will come up and be able to demolish what we have going on here. So yeah, I totally agree with what David just said.
And I would encourage folks to, this is why I've been a thorn in my school district side about more comprehensive history curriculum, because I had said, you know, to somebody, if I had known you know, as a little girl, the story of the mathematicians and the calculators with who the movie Hidden Figures is based on. If I had known some of these things or had been taught those things, it would have changed my life. Like, it would have changed the entire trajectory of my life. And so I think that sometimes when we're pushing for things like for Black American history to be taught in American history, it's not because we just we want our kids to learn about racism. Black people have do things outside of be hurt and oppressed by white people. We have managed to do lots of important and significant things, but we're not taught those things. And so if you don't see it, you can't be it. And so that's why I am a huge proponent of that. And I encourage parents, Black and white, to really push the school districts more to talk about Black history, because it gives students something to look at other than all our lives we've been oppressed. Well, that's not, we have, but in spite of that, we've done all of these great things. And I think that that's, you know, my piece on that.
Yeah.
Love that, Tamika, in spite of. That's what Myron has achieved, all of you have achieved. We can still reach success, but it's in spite of white supremacy, not with the assistance of. I wanted to uplift a few things that have come my way. David Muhammad, people really loved your comments about internalized oppression and the work that people of color have to do as we are dealing with systemic oppression. Melissa, Councilman Robinson. I've known Melissa for some time, so I call her Melissa instead of Councilman Robinson, so please forgive me. People also commented on the history of redlining that's led to the segregation and why we see traditionally white spaces and not as many brown faces, so I wanted to say that. We are getting down to the end, so I wanted to give a question that, again, all of you can respond to. Someone asked, can you re-emphasize the importance of why it is so critical, actually it's required, that those in power don't remain silent and get involved as a person with power and privilege and support any one of the issues that you have described?
Well, again, it goes back to the relationship. We need to be in relationship with each other. It's not us versus them. It's not Black versus white. Again, Dr. King said it's about wrong versus right. And so let's be in relationship on a righteous path to where we know that we can go and we will be better for it if we get there together. But you know, when you're in relationships, Ayanna Van Zant tells us that we have to do our work, right? So each side has to do their work in order to come to this place from a whole perspective. And so, yes, as African Americans, people of color, there's work that we have to do, but there's also work that needs to be done from white spaces as well. So I think that is critical and important, and it's our North Star as we think about reconciliation and how do we come together, because as it's been stated before, perhaps that these systems weren't built to last. And so now it's our time and it's our moment to dismantle them and build a righteous system in which we can work and everyone can achieve their deepest desires and dreams. That's what this should all be about.
Yeah. I'd like to echo that. And, you know, I think that oftentimes we have to start looking at what do we want our legacies to be, right? And so those in power, what do you want your legacy to be? Because most likely you could live out the rest of your life and not change anything and probably be fine. But the question I've been thinking of lately is, you know, these power structures, do you want your statue getting pulled down 30 years from now, 40 years from now, 50 years from now? Is that the legacy you want? You know, and so, you know, you can either leave behind a legacy of you staying in control and oppressing people, or you can leave behind a legacy of uplifting people. And then that legacy will be what leaves behind for your family to come, right? Those who carry your name, they're going to be the ones who have to carry that legacy. And so you can start the wheels turning now, and you might not live to see it, but your grandchildren will be able to be proud of the turn that you made and not have to worry about people wanting to change the name of your street.
So powerful. You gave me the goosebumps on that one. Tamika, did you want to add on?
No.
Okay, I saw you unmuted. Didn't mean to call on you. I believe that's going to be our last question for the question and answer time. And I was thinking about this discussion. How do you possibly get the experiences of Black people in a dialogue or a conversation, and it felt akin to how do we talk about Black history in a month that's 28 days. And so it's never enough time or experiences. And while we have talked before, I know all of us, this is not new to this conversation is not new. I hope the listening is. I hope the listening is with intention that's going to lead to action and operationalize how we are going to dismantle racism together as a community. But as we know, we're calling on our white colleagues, our neighbors, our white friends and family members to carry this weight because they're the ones who have the privilege and the power to do so. So thank you so much today for this conversation. It was wonderful. And we're unfortunately that we've come to this end of our time. And I want to thank you specifically, David Muhammad, Tamika Thompson, Councilwoman Melissa Robinson, Myron McCant, Jari Brooks. We're going to hear more from you, Jari. And we're just so grateful that you were here today to share your experiences. And to end this session, I'd like to introduce Diane Cleaver, who needs little introduction. She's the president and CEO of the Urban Neighborhood Initiative. And I wanted to make mention that UNI is also a sponsor of the Urban Neighborhood Initiative of this event today. So with further ado, we'll throw it over to Ms. Cleaver. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Nicole. And I just want to say thank you to everybody. Nicole, for your skillful facilitation, our panelists for your insightful and impactful remarks. I really enjoyed hearing you. I know sometimes it can be difficult to listen to, but it's so essential that we share these things and that people do listen. If we're going to gain the kind of understanding, not a surface understanding, but the kind of understanding that moves us from hearing to doing, as you all have all mentioned. And this is a time for doing. This is a time for doing, both as individuals and as businesses and organizations. So I encourage each of you, each of us, to think about specific ways in which we can contribute to the change that just has to happen. And we hope to be able to provide you with more information that can assist you in that regard, in figuring out what specific changes you can make. Systemic racism is an evil, and it has to be rooted out, and it won't be easy. It has to be rooted out, whether it's corporate, whether it's in education, or the health system, or law enforcement, or any other agencies or organizations, any other institutional structure. And that's where it resides at this point. We have to all do our part or it's not going to happen. The organization I lead, the Urban Neighborhood Initiative, one of the Chamber's Big Five, is trying to do its part. Our 10 partner neighborhoods in the urban core are about 80% African American and about 2/3 low income. We are working to give residents equal access to affordable homes, healthy neighborhoods, and other opportunities that have been systemically denied to them. And when I say systemically denied, that means there's something in the system that has been a barrier to them accessing these things. We'd be happy for you to find out more about our work on our website at uni-kc.org, and we would appreciate your support. I'm happy to say this is just the second in a series of listening sessions that we are hosting. We encourage you to join us on July 8th and July 15th, and you'll be getting more information about the specifics on those dates. And then on July 29th for a final session on what's next at the KC Chamber's Power of Diversity Breakfast. Again, thank you all, to our panelists, to our listeners, so much for being here. I hope you found it enlightening, and I hope you found it motivating. Thank you.